Amazing Spider-Man 2. There ain't nothing amazing about that game. That game's a piece of trash. I can't.
Oh man, look at what we stumbled upon here. Spider-Man 2, a game that for so many years was considered to be the pinnacle of not only what hero games could do, but what open world games could do as well. It was the benchmark that so many games afterward would come to for inspiration. It revolutionized not only the hero genre, but the Spider-Man genre itself. When people think of good Spider-Man games, instantaneously they think of this game. It's almost synonymous. They don't think of Shattered Dimensions, and they definitely don't think of The Amazing Spider-Man. But this game. But why is it held with such regard? What makes this game so great? Would anyone really want to play this now? Does it even hold up? Well, all those questions will be answered shortly, but to really give you a look at how much has changed, let's do a little recap. At this point, 3 3D Spider-Man games have been developed and published, all 3 with different developers under the hood, but have all subsequently used the same modified Tony Hawk engine, which, at this point, left much to be desired. Don't get me wrong, each game was fun and good in their own unique way, but you can only see the same trick so many times before it starts getting stale. And for as much as Spider-Man the movie game changed things up, it wasn't quite enough to make you feel like it was anything substantially different. It was, at its core, another incarnation of the first PS1 game. Well, 2 years after the release of Spider-Man the movie game, and Treyarch finally had the time to put their foot on the ground and say, let's take this in another direction. Gone was the modified Tony Hawk engine, and in was the brand new Treyarch engine on display for all to see, sporting all sorts of brand new kinks that absolutely no one was expecting. But I'm getting ahead of myself here. The point is, Treyarch knew they had a chance to make something special, and absolutely brilliant. And they did not disappoint. Who would have thought that an Activision-owned developer would have put actual effort into their games? I miss the pre-COD 4 days. The game not only looked drastically different from any of its predecessors, but played drastically differently too, opting for an open world in a fully rendered virtual Manhattan, even adding in Roosevelt and Liberty Island for kicks, and with a brand new mechanics that made you forget that the previous games had such a linear-based design around it. Nonetheless, let's get to the nitty-gritty here and start off with the review, shall we? This Spider-Man game is yet again another movie tie-in game, which means its plot once again takes from what the film corresponding to the title does and kind of cliff notes it in exactly the same way the first movie game did. The game does a good job trying to recreate scenes from the film, but it really wouldn't be fair to critique the game's plot because it is, for the most part, based off of the film. And if you're trying to critique the game's plot that's based off of the film, you're essentially critiquing the film itself and not the game, and you can kind of see how convoluted this is getting. The rest of the missions where the plot is suspended are well done and fit to the movie universe as well as you would expect them to. But again, there aren't anything that I would personally say are the greatest pieces of writing in the world, and are just there for good fun and nods to the Spider-Man source material more so than the films can or ever did come close to doing. It follows the film well enough to not have you bored out of your mind with the whole Peter Parker struggling to balance his personal life and being Spider-Man by making you walk around as a powerless Peter Parker for 18 chapters, but reinforces that it is taking a toll on him by displaying his estranged relationships with both his friends and, of course, the woman he loves, Mary Jane. This deserves a nod of approval here, as that would have been boring as all hell to go through the game as Peter as he nags on about Spider-Man being a burden on him, with raindrops falling on his head like the film did. Like I mentioned before, the game gives several nods to the Spidey lore and even has several returning characters and even Easter eggs regarding the first game. For example, the Chrysler building where you fight Vulture in the first game has some of Vulture's feathers left over on some of the sides of the building. It's a neat little nod. Shocker's also back in the game, serving as a side villain alongside with Rhino, who just shows up as being rather quickly and never to be heard from again, and Mysterio also makes his triumphant return to the game with an origin to boot. Admittedly, this is the only incarnation of Mysterio in past or present games that I've actually liked, and it might be due to him finally having a motive to come after Spidey instead of just being another random generic villain or placeholder. Sure, his origin might be cliche, but he's at least developed and is the only one out of the side villains to do so, as Shocker's only out for revenge for Spidey locking him up, and Rhino just shows up, And Black Cat, who Spidey mistakes as a criminal at the beginning of the game, kind of just shows up as well. Yeah, I'm not kidding. There's not much explanation as to why she's even here, or even Rhino for that matter. They both just show up. But in the case of Black Cat, it's not a bad thing. She's at least eye candy in comparison to... Oh god, get it away! And she presents a whole new dynamic to the Spider-Man character and why he needs to be Peter Parker as well as Spider-Man. Doc Ock is easily the most fleshed out baddie in the game, seeming that the central plot revolves around him. But the story kind of rushes through most of it, and it feels oddly paced at times. Without giving too much away, he's a super nice guy when you first meet him, then super evil to the point of dismembering Mary Jane, and then all of a sudden he's a good guy and realizes his evil ways and his errors. You see what I mean? It's really odd, and it strikes you like a bat to the face, and it's really hard to feel sympathetic for the guy unless you watch the movie and understand the context between it, but even so, the movie itself, when I watched that, I always found that troubling and puzzling. It's just weird. Regardless of such, the story does a good job of being a video game adaptation of the film while keeping things fresh with newer elements that we wouldn't have seen otherwise if the game followed the film to a T. Kind of like the first game. Could it have been better? Of course. But with what they had to do, being forced to put the film's plot in here and all, it works fine, and the most important part is that it's all functional. Even the characters are written really well to the point where you'll actually start to debate that the video game Spidey is better than the film Spidey in terms of the Raimi film games. Of course, McGuire's dry delivery won't have you gasping for air with laughter, and I'll get into the voice acting later, but the fact that the game manages to throw a penis joke...
Problems with your laser, Beck? I hear there are pills for that now.
And, well, jokes in general that are actually funny and in some cases a bit mature for the older audience, in comparison to the film, which doesn't add anything at all, adds to the overall experience. And I applaud Treyarch for actually having the balls, no pun intended, to sneak things in like that. Nothing really feels out of place and everything has a purpose, and it's because of the occasional liberty that the game takes from distancing itself from the film that it creates moments that are truly memorable. For instance, the game primarily is an open-world game. Most missions will require you to engage in combat on the open city streets, but there's a select handful that have you indoors for a more linear-based experience. These levels are the ones that'll stick out in your head the most, because first and foremost, it's a very bold thing to do when you're swinging around a huge city for most of the game to stick Spidey back between four walls, and well, the levels themselves are actually quite good. And all offer different memorable set pieces that'll have you thinking about it for days. It's really brilliant design when you come to think about it, as it breaks the feeling of the game becoming stale, just being an open world game with open world things to do. And it's a nod to those who prefer the old style of Spidey games being linear based. Mysterio's Funhouse and the Madison Square Garden challenges are two of just many memorable moments that happen in these few linear based levels. The more you help random civilians via the green marker triggers you see when you're swinging around, or the random crimes that generate throughout the entire city, such as hideouts, stick-ups, muggings, gang wars, and... balloons. This infamous Mother Pfeiffer is the bane of my existence. You can be as focused as you possibly can in this game, swinging throughout the city seamlessly. But as soon as you hear that cry, everything is just lost, like a glass shattering in a silent room.
My balloon!
It's so incredibly annoying. Thankfully, it's not as common as some of the other random crimes, but it's definitely the most tedious. You have to stop whatever it is you're doing. Of course, the quest is optional, but if you want to be Spidey, you're gonna do it. Track down this stupid kid's balloon and give it back to him before it gets too high and it's impossible to reach. You also cannot web the balloon back because the webbing will cause the balloon to break, causing you to waste your time in failing the objective. And to top it all off, the kid doesn't even say thank you when you do retrieve it for him. He'll spew out a cry of content for you getting the balloon, sure, but when you actually give it to him, you rarely ever hear him utter the words thank you. Anyway, the more crimes you deal with, the better the advantage you'll have, because the more points you'll have in your inventory to exchange at the Spidey store. Within every new chapter, more upgrades become available, and in standard form, the more powerful they are, the more expensive they get. So, getting your hero on does come with its benefits. Fortunately, Treyarch got ahead and realized that bashing on mook heads would eventually extend its welcome over time and pack the game with multitudes of different ways to earn those hero points. These all range from time objectives, which include pizza delivery, daily bugle deadline photo ops, Mary Jane dates, as well as token set collecting from things such as skyscraper tokens, buoy tokens, hideout secrets, and there's also races scattered throughout the city, of course. And you can also get hero points by hitting each individual hint markers scattered throughout the entire city. There's about 250 each, so good luck trying to do that. The game makes sure that options are available for any type of player, and if you like to explore, the set collecting tokens are there for you. If you like to have more of an action-oriented approach, there's always crime to deal with. And if you like to test your swing abilities, then the timed objective races are for you. The options in the game are insurmountable, and the best part about them is that, for the most part, they're all really fun, keeping a fair amount of difficulty as you progress through them, and never really becoming frustrating. That is, of course, if you're not doing some of the races, because some of those can become really insane. From a graphical presentation, it's often looked at for being kind of fugly in comparison to the first game, especially when it comes to the NPCs. Their mouths don't move, their hands are in triangular form, and they just look plain blocky. The city itself, though, looks okay, but looking at it now, it definitely has aged a bit, and it's not what it used to be back in 2004, receiving all the praise it did for looking as good as it did. It still looks miles better than the amazing Spider-Man city, though, but that's not really saying much, is it? As for the important character models, Spider-Man looks okay, but his head looks admittedly a little bit weird. I think it might be the eyes, but something about it just looks off. The Spider-Man model from the first game was perfect, with the exception of his hands being just a tad bit too small, so I'm not sure why the call was made to remake a completely new model. Perhaps maybe it was for animation purposes, but I wouldn't know. Peter Parker also bears some resemblance to Tobey Maguire, so it's okay. You can at least tell that they made a genuine effort to make it look like their respective actors. He's at least distinguishable. And the same could be said for a Harry Osborn, Otto Octavius, and pretty much any main character in the game. But Mary Jane, Jesus H. Christ, what happened to her face? It looks like she got caught up in a meat grinder. The only time Mary Jane looks like herself is during the CG cutscenes, which thankfully make everyone look like they're supposed to, with the only exception being Tobey Maguire in the very last cutscene. Look at this. I don't even need to speak. Just look at his potatoed-ass face. What happened? It's like the artist tried to merge Tobey's face with Gomez from the Addams Family. Now, to be fair, with the amount of content this game was packing, something needed to give, especially considering that this was going to be a multi-platform game, and something was needed to be sacrificed in order to provide the equal experience on all consoles. So, the hidden graphics by and large was okay with me. The game does have pop-in here and there, but it's mostly just light posts, and it's never anything major like building textures that are like 2 feet in front of you, or objects that'll prevent you from moving on. And, well, honestly, it was 2004. Just about every single game had pop-in due to the limitations of the consoles. So it's not like it's the game's fault. And to be honest, even if there is pop-in, the game still plays and looks silky smooth with absolutely no frame drops whatsoever. So, honestly, no complaints here. The voice acting in the game, for the most part, is pretty great. Black Cat sounds hot, and the stand-in for J.K. Simmons does okay as J. Jonah Jameson. Josh Keaton reprising his role, taking over James Franco's Harry Osborn, again is on point, and Alfred Molina at least tries, which is more than I can say for the two lead actors. Kirsten Dunst and Tobey Maguire couldn't have phoned in a performance more harder than they did here. Don't believe me? Have a listen. It's near old-school Resident Evil bad with these two.
What are you doing here?
You know me, always hanging around. Oh! No!
I'm getting married. I don't know if you heard.
Oh, really? What's he like?
He's there. He loves me, and he's there.
I see.
If I had any pride in my work as an actor, I would have never let something like this pass, and it truly bothers me that these two got paid to literally not give a shit just because it's a game. It's shameful. If this was the way it was going to be with these two from the get-go, I would have rather had Josh Keaton stand in for Tobey Maguire like they originally were going to do for the first Spider-Man game. Boy, oh boy, we have to deal with this one more time, guys. But even with Tobey Maguire and Kirsten Dunst both phoning in a performance, they still cannot be outdone by the atrocity that is the NPCs in terms of voice acting in this game. Once again, I don't even need to speak. Just listen.
Girl, if she doesn't get to the hospital fast.
It hurts. It hurts.
Music in this game deserves praise for being absolutely phenomenal. From the opening triumphant heroic score to the action-pumped techno rock songs that accompany you throughout your quests, as well as some of the instrumental music added in for your downtime swinging around the city. They help provide an atmospheric feeling of being this larger-than-life superhero in this virtual world. And while it may not be as memorable as, say, the PS1 game soundtrack, you'll definitely be sucked into the game by this rich soundtrack that opens its doors for you, preparing you for an epic tale. But the real question is, what makes this game so great? Sure, it's packed to the brim with content and things to do, and sure, it's a more involved Spider-Man game, having you physically go up to pedestrians to solve crimes and do things that Spidey would do throughout his adventures in New York, but what makes this game so definitive? What puts the stamp of approval in everyone's book and makes the other games an afterthought? Simply put, two things: combat and maneuverability. Combat has now gone through a radical transformation. Sure, some animations may look the same or may even be borrowed from past games, but the entire mechanic as a whole has changed. For starters, the combo system from previous games is gone. Newly implemented into this game is the one-button attack system. Since I'm playing on the PS2, it's square. Square handles all melee combat, as triangle now handles all webbing attacks, which no longer just webs up goons and incapacitates them that way, but can blind them, disarm them, as well as for the first time in any Spider-Man game, attach itself to multiple enemies for mass hilarity and ultimate effectiveness. Being able to quickly disarm up to 4 goons in one rapid succession or subdue them, the choice is yours on how you want to engage them. It makes combat so much easier and streamlined from past games. You also finally have a much needed dodge button mapped out to be the circle button. You see, in past Spider-Man games, the spider sense wasn't really mapped out to anything other than to alert you of an oncoming stage hazard or enemies put in spots where you really couldn't anticipate them. Dodging, for the most part, was non-existent unless you felt like being a gorilla for half the game and jumping all around. But in this game, Spider Sense becomes what it should have always been in a Spider-Man game: an alert to the player that an attack is incoming and the time to dodge is now. You have to correctly time the counter to the enemy attack or else risk getting socked in the face and looking like a fool, or you could just mash circle and do the spider dance. But the real star of the game is the mobility of Spider-Man. In previous games, mobility was pretty much an afterthought. The developers had always danced around the idea of how Spider-Man should move around with his patented trademark web swinging, opting to have him move in a more hand-like animation that had him swinging pretty much off of nothing. Yeah, it's as if his webs would attach to the clouds. And while this momentarily solved the swinging crisis that plagued the earlier games, it was no longer an excuse to have it continue to be this way, especially in an open-world game in 2004. Design-wise, it was of course impossible to have a proper swinging mechanic in the earlier games due to the grid-like stature of some of the levels presented to you, and of course system limitations. But in this game, that barrier is gone. Treyarch brought their A-game to the table here and got rid of the canned animations and the cloud swinging from past games, and instead added fully functional momentum-based swinging physics and a height cap so that your webs wouldn't be able to attach to anything that's below you, in terms of buildings, or an impossible range that you couldn't realistically attach a web line to. Because of the complicated nature of those swinging physics, I'll try to do my best to give you the cliff notes using examples from past games. You see, in the past, Spider-Man had no momentum, meaning his landing points were often predetermined, or in the case of the first movie game, Spidey swung at one speed at a certain height until you, the player, decided to manually let go of the web line and fall straight down. This game, however, decided to introduce momentum-based physics that entitled the player complete control of his or her direction and speed. Because of the realistic physics, if you're traveling at a fast speed and let go of your web line, it also depends where on your swing you let go, you'll be carrying a ton of momentum that'll either have you shooting straight up in the air, down to the ground, or soaring through the air until you manually shoot out your next web line. It's the way everyone envisioned swinging to be, and it was finally brought out in this game. But the momentum doesn't only just stop here. It also carries over to the occasional building you may hit while swinging. You see, if you're swinging at a super fast speed and crash into a building, just slightly before coming into contact with said wall, you can initiate a wall sprint. Depending on how fast you're moving, it'll carry over to the wall sprint, never breaking the sense of flow and fluidity that web swinging has, as you can shoot your next web line as soon as you jump off that wall doing the wall sprint. This keeps the fast-paced movement that's akin to Spider-Man and makes for some pretty spectacular looking stunts. And as mentioned before, the game also has a height cap. What this means is that players are no longer able to attach webs to thin air anymore. In order for you to swing off of anything, there at least needs to be a building present or some type of object that's taller than Spidey so you can attach a web on it. If there's nothing nearby, Spidey will plummet to the ground, and if you're at a huge height distance, you're going to die. Take notes, Beanox. Also, in this game, when Spider-Man lets go of a web line, it actually stays on the building. It just doesn't disappear into thin air within 3 seconds of letting it go. I guess attention to detail is something that's been lost over the years. Spidey also now has a sprint button, which is a much welcome change to the usual slow Spidey jog that the past games have had. But the best part about it is it also carries over to both swinging and crawling, meaning no matter what, speed is an option, and there's always a way for you to get your hustle on. The overall feeling when you do successfully chain together multiple swings, plus the overall sense of speed and freedom to do things like Spidey would, is the closest we're going to get to comic book visuals coming to life outside of film. And for something that's never been done before, it's an absolutely amazing thing that we could even do this in a video game. And to see people who have mastered the art of swinging in this game is truly a sight to behold. Just take a look at the demo at the beginning of the game. Despite all the things this game does right, it also does have its fair share of issues. Apart from hokey voice acting and terrible graphics for the NPC character models, the game also has no real difficulty. It's an easygoing experience with only 1 or 2 real challenges throughout the entire game. With that being said, the game is also extremely short with only 18 chapters in total, with people beating the game's story in under 2 hours. Despite the game having extra content in terms of things to do, it's a shame that none of these costumes from past games even remotely make it back into this game, making some of these tasks seem pointless as the only thing they ever do is give you hero points. But once there's no real need to them, why would you care to do some of these in the first place? On top of that, the pesky camera also peeks its ugly hand in occasionally. It's usually only during tight closed spaces, but it's definitely an annoyance when it does happen, as the camera pans awkwardly, making it hard to see where enemies are, and leaves Spider-Man open to a sneak attack. That is, of course, if you cannot react to your spider sense quickly enough. Also, for as cool as the thing as spider reflexes are, there's no real usage for it other than to test it out. You can go the entire game without using it once, and unless your reaction time for a spider sense is actually terrible, you'll never use it at all unless you're like me and like using the spider steps combo, which is a spider reflexes exclusive. But with that being said, these complaints aren't enough to bring this game down. Combat is simple and streamlined so that anyone can do it, and it's enjoyable. Story is relatively fun, albeit short, and the city is enormous with tons of places to explore with a user-friendly mini-map that actually helps you find things. And most importantly, for the first time ever, you actually feel like you can do whatever it is a spider can. It's not hard to see why this game is classified as being one of the best Spider-Man games ever, only ever rivaled by another game that dared to be ultimate. Spider-Man 2 is one of those games that everyone should play at least once. It has inspired an entire genre of games and pioneered the way for games like Infamous, and of course, even the Arkham series. As far as a recommendation goes, I tell you to pick this up at all costs, as the price for the game is dirt cheap, and it's honestly a PlayStation 2 classic. And you'll be doing yourself a favor playing one of the best hero games of the PlayStation 2 era. Treyarch, I thank you for making this awesomely spectacular game.
Well, Spider-Man 2, it's been real. It was a pleasure playing such a great Spider-Man game. Too bad after you, all we got was a plethora of mediocre titles and games that just didn't even care anymore. I miss the good old days. Unfortunately, what we get are the likes of you. And, well, you're not all that great, are you? For a game that's so-called amazing.